Good evening, everyone, and thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak from the heart. I want to talk about something deeply personal and universally true: failure. We all encounter it. Sometimes it comes softly like a whisper reminding us of what could have been. Other times it hits like a crashing wave, knocking us off our feet and leaving us struggling to breathe. But no matter how it arrives, failure is something none of us can escape. And yet there is hope, there is purpose. Because the God who sees the end from the beginning does not let failure have the final word. Today, I want to encourage you with the truth that God is flipping your failure into favor. Think back to a time in your life when you felt like you had missed the mark completely. Maybe it was a job you didn't get, a relationship that ended, a dream that fell apart, or a decision you made that seemed to ruin everything. In those moments, the weight of disappointment can feel unbearable. You might have thought, this is it. I blew it. Nothing good can come from this. But what if I told you that the very thing you thought would break you is what God will use to bless you? What if I told you that your worst moment is not a dead end, but a setup for divine favor? Let's take a look at the story of Joseph in the Bible. Here is a man who had dreams, literal dreams from God. He believed them, he shared them, and for that he was hated by his own brothers. They threw him in a pit and sold him into slavery. That's a failure in the eyes of the world, isn't it? Betrayed by family, cast aside, and taken to a foreign land. But that was not the end of the story. Joseph served faithfully, but just when things seemed to be improving, he was falsely accused and thrown into prison. Another failure, another closed door. But even in prison, God was working. Joseph gained favor in the eyes of those around him. Eventually, the very gift that caused so much trouble, his ability to interpret dreams, became the key that unlocked his destiny. In one day, Joseph went from prisoner to prime minister. That's not just a turnaround. That's favor born from failure. You see, God doesn't waste anything, not your pain, not your mistakes, not your delays. When things fall apart, God isn't caught off guard. He's not scrambling to find a backup plan. He is sovereign, and he uses even the broken pieces of your life to build something beautiful. Sometimes the failure you experience is necessary to position you for what's next. You might not see it now, but every closed door, every setback, every tear has a purpose. We tend to define failure by human standards. We think success is a straight line moving upward without interruption. But the journey with God is rarely linear. It's full of twists and turns, seasons of silence and moments of confusion. But in those very moments, God is at work. He is shaping your character, teaching you resilience, and most importantly, drawing you closer to Him. Favor isn't just about open doors and blessings. It's about the presence of God walking with you through the fire, the valley, and the wilderness. Sometimes God allows us to experience failure to teach us dependence. When everything is going well, it's easy to rely on our own strength. But when we're broken, we have no choice but to cling to Him. And it's in that place of surrender that favor begins to grow. God favors those who trust Him, who lean on Him, who acknowledge that without Him they can do nothing. So don't despise your failures. Embrace them as opportunities for God to show His power in your weakness. The world may count you out, but God never does. He sees what others can't. He knows the plans He has for you. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans to give you hope and a future. When people walk away, when doors shut, when dreams seem to die, remember that God is still writing your story, and the chapters ahead are filled with restoration, redemption, and reward. Think of Moses. He failed in Egypt, ran away in fear, and spent 40 years in the wilderness. Most would say his life was over, but God called him from a burning bush and sent him back to the place of his failure with a mission that would change history. Or consider Peter, who denied Jesus 3 times. That's a crushing failure, especially for someone so close to Christ. But Jesus didn't discard him. He restored him and used him to preach the message of salvation to thousands. That's what God does. He flips failure into favor. Your story is not over because of a failure. It's being rewritten by the hand of a faithful God. He is the God of second chances, of new beginnings, of divine comebacks. So don't lose hope. Don't settle in your disappointment. Look up. Your Redeemer lives, and he is turning things around in ways you can't yet imagine. Sometimes the favor that follows failure is not just about you. It's about those who will be blessed through your journey. Your pain has a purpose beyond your personal growth. It becomes a testimony. When others see how you rose from the ashes, they'll find hope for their own lives. Your scars will speak louder than your successes ever could. That's the beauty of God's grace. He takes the things the enemy meant for evil and uses them for good. You might feel unworthy, you might feel ashamed, but God is not done with you. In fact, he specializes in using the broken, the flawed, and the forgotten. When he flips your failure into favor, it's not because you earned it, it's because he loves you. It's not about your ability, but his sovereignty. And when he blesses you, it will be clear to everyone around you that it was God who lifted you up. Right now, you may be in the middle of the failure. You might not see the light at the end of the tunnel. But hold on. God is working behind the scenes. The same God who parted the Red Sea, who brought water from a rock, who raised the dead, is working in your life. He's orchestrating the right people, the right timing, and the right circumstances to bring about your breakthrough. Don't compare your journey to others. Don't judge your worth by temporary setbacks. You are not your failure. You are a child of God, chosen and loved. Your identity is not tied to what didn't work out. Your identity is anchored in Christ, and he has declared that you are more than a conqueror. So rise up, dust yourself off, get back in the game. The enemy wants you to believe it's over, but God is saying, I'm just getting started. There's a harvest coming. There's joy on the other side of sorrow. There's favor in your future. Keep the faith. Keep pressing forward. Keep believing that God is who he says he is. When you trust him, even your failures become platforms for his glory. The very thing that was meant to destroy you will become the thing that elevates you. And when the favor comes, and it will come, don't forget where it came from. Give God the glory. Let your story point others to his faithfulness. Use your testimony to lift others who are walking through their own valleys. Remind them that failure is not the end, but a beginning in disguise. A beginning of something new, something beautiful, something eternal. So tonight, I want you to walk away with this truth sealed in your heart. God is flipping your failure into favor. Not because of who you are, but because of who he is. Not because of what you've done, but because of what Jesus did on the cross. His grace is greater than your mistake. His love is stronger than your fear. And his plans for you are still alive. No matter how far you've fallen, no matter how many times you've failed, no matter how hopeless things may seem, God is not finished. He is the author and the finisher. What he starts, he completes. And he is turning your mourning into dancing, your weeping into joy, your failure into favor. Failure is not final with God. That's a truth that might seem hard to believe when you're standing in the middle of disappointment, regret, or broken dreams. It's easy to think that because something didn't go the way we planned, because a door shut, an opportunity fell through, or we made a mistake, we've somehow disqualified ourselves from God's plan. But God does not write people off because they failed. In fact, some of the greatest transformations in Scripture and in life happened after a moment of failure. Because with God, failure is never the end of the story. It's a turning point. All of us have failed at some point. We've said the wrong things, made the wrong decisions, hurt people, or let ourselves down. It's part of being human. But what sets our journey apart is who holds the pen. If we trust in ourselves alone, then yes, failure feels final. But when our lives are in God's hands, even our worst mistakes can be redeemed. God doesn't just restore what was lost, He renews, He rebuilds, and sometimes He brings us into something even better than what we originally hoped for. Think of Jonah, who ran away from God's call. By all appearances, his story should have ended in that storm at sea. But God prepared a way not to punish him, but to reposition him. The belly of the fish wasn't the end. It was the place of reflection and redirection. Jonah was given another chance. His failure didn't disqualify him. It humbled him and brought him back to purpose. That's what God does. He doesn't erase your failures. He uses them. He takes the lessons, the broken pieces, and the scars and turns them into wisdom, testimony, and favor. There's something powerful that happens when we stop seeing failure as defeat and start seeing it as a doorway. Failure reveals where we are weak, where we are proud, where we need God more than we thought, and in that space, when we are at our lowest, God meets us with grace. It's when we let go of control, when we finally admit we can't do it on our own, that we open the door to real transformation. The world tells us to fear failure, to avoid it at all costs. But God says, my grace is sufficient for you, for my strength is made perfect in weakness. When we embrace that truth, we begin to see failure differently. We stop asking, why did this happen to me? And start asking, God, what are you doing through this? That shift in perspective is where healing begins. What looks like a closed door could be God's protection. What feels like a delay could be divine timing. And what seems like a painful ending might actually be the beginning of something better than we imagined. The enemy wants you to believe that your failure defines you, that it's a label you can't shake. But God doesn't label people by their worst moments. He sees the whole story. He sees who you are becoming, and He's not done writing. Every time you think it's over, He says, watch what I can do. He specializes in resurrections, in bringing life where there was death, hope where there was despair. That dream that died, God can breathe new life into it. That opportunity that passed you by, He can bring one even greater. That mistake that haunts you, He can use it to build compassion, maturity, and depth in you that you never had before. Sometimes God allows failure not to punish us, but to position us. He knows what we need to become who we are called to be. So, if you're in a season where things didn't work out, where you feel like you failed, remember, this isn't the end. It might be the beginning of something new, something deeper, something eternal. Hold on to faith. Let God finish what He started in you, because failure is never final in the hands of a faithful God. God uses brokenness to bring favor. That is one of the most comforting and powerful truths woven throughout Scripture and echoed in the lives of so many people. What the world considers damaged, ruined, or discarded, God sees as a canvas for redemption. Over and over, God takes broken people, broken dreams, and broken situations and flips them into vessels for His favor. He does not avoid brokenness. He works through it. In fact, He often chooses it as the very place to display His power and grace. We see this so clearly in the life of Joseph. Here was a young man with dreams straight from heaven, but before those dreams were fulfilled, he was betrayed by his own brothers, sold into slavery, falsely accused, and thrown into prison. From the outside, his life appeared to be falling apart, step by step. He went from a favored son to a forgotten prisoner. But God was not done. Each painful chapter was part of the process. What looked like abandonment was actually positioning. In the dark and broken spaces of Joseph's life, God was setting him up for favor. And when the time came, in one day, Joseph was lifted from a prison cell to a palace, from being forgotten to becoming a ruler. The broken road led to a purpose greater than he could have imagined, not only for himself, but for an entire nation. Moses also knew brokenness intimately. Once a prince of Egypt, full of potential and power, he fled into the wilderness after killing a man. He became a shepherd, hidden, unknown, and stripped of his identity. He spent 40 years in the wilderness, likely feeling like a failure, disconnected from the purpose he once sensed. But even in that place of brokenness, God was preparing him. The wilderness became a training ground, and the bush that burned without being consumed became the moment of calling. From a broken man with a past, God brought forth a leader who would confront Pharaoh and deliver Israel. The same Moses who doubted his ability and carried the weight of past mistakes became the instrument of one of the greatest miracles in history. His brokenness did not disqualify him. It made him dependent, and in that dependence, God brought favor. And then there's Peter, the bold disciple who swore he would never leave Jesus. But when the pressure came, Peter denied him 3 times. That kind of failure cuts deep. For someone who loved Jesus, that kind of betrayal must have left Peter heartbroken and ashamed. He wept bitterly, the weight of his failure heavy on his soul. But Jesus didn't reject him. After the resurrection, Jesus went looking for Peter, not to shame him, but to restore him. He asked him 3 times, "Do you love me?" Not to remind him of his denial, but to reestablish his identity and his calling. Peter, the one who failed publicly, became the one who preached boldly at Pentecost, leading thousands to faith. From failure to favor, this is how God works. In all these stories, brokenness was not the end. It was the place where God's favor began to shine brightest. When human strength fails, God's strength steps in. When pride is stripped away, humility opens the door for grace. And where shame and regret once lived, purpose and power begin to rise. God still does this today. He still meets people in their lowest moments and lifts them up. He still sees potential in the most shattered hearts. You may feel broken by life, by decisions, by circumstances outside your control, but you are not disqualified. You are not discarded. You are being prepared. The very areas where you feel weak, undone, or forgotten may be the exact places where God will show himself strong. Favor doesn't always come in the form of ease or comfort. Sometimes it comes after loss, after pain, after crying out with nothing left to give. But that's when God moves. That's when he whispers, "My grace is sufficient for you." He takes the broken pieces of your life and begins to piece them back together, not to make them look like they once did, but to make them into something new, something better, something with eternal value. So don't be afraid of brokenness. Don't hide it, and don't be ashamed of it. God is near to the brokenhearted. He does not run from the broken. He runs to them. And when he arrives, he doesn't just bring healing, he brings favor. Favor that opens doors no one can shut. Favor that turns ashes into beauty. Favor that writes new stories out of ruined pages. God is not looking for perfect people. He's looking for willing hearts, hearts that are humble, surrendered, and open to being used. And if that means walking through seasons of brokenness to get there, then take heart, because on the other side of brokenness is favor, purpose, and the unmistakable hand of God working for your good. Your identity is not in your failure. That's a truth we need to hear again and again, especially when we're weighed down by guilt, regret, or the fear that we've messed up too badly to recover. The world can be quick to define us by our mistakes, by what we didn't get right, or by where we fell short. People might remember us for our lowest moments. We might even label ourselves by them: failure, disappointment, unworthy. But God doesn't see us through the lens of failure. He sees us through the lens of his love, his purpose, and his grace. You are not what you did wrong. You are who God says you are, and that never changes. When we fail, it's easy to feel like our identity has been shattered. Maybe it was a personal decision, a sin, a broken relationship, or a lost opportunity that makes you feel like you're no longer the person you once were or hoped to be. But even when everything around you changes, even when you've made mistakes that alter the course of your life, Your core identity as God's beloved remains untouched. That truth is not rooted in your performance. It's rooted in the unchanging nature of God. He is the one who formed you, called you, and chose you, knowing every weakness and every wrong turn you would take, and He didn't walk away. In the eyes of God, your failure is a moment, not your identity. The enemy would love to trap you in shame, to keep you stuck by whispering lies that you're no longer worthy, that you've gone too far, or that you're defined by what went wrong. But those are lies. God does not define you by your past. He defines you by His promise. You are forgiven, you are redeemed, you are loved. No amount of failure can erase the truth that you are made in His image and called according to His purpose. Look at David. He committed terrible sins, adultery, deception, even murder. From a human perspective, he had every reason to be labeled a failure. Yet God still called him a man after His own heart. Why? Because David repented, returned to God, and found his identity not in perfection, but in God's mercy. His story didn't end with his worst mistake, and neither does yours. Paul, once known as Saul, was a persecutor of Christians. His identity before Christ was rooted in pride, violence, and misguided zeal, but when he encountered Jesus, everything changed. God didn't just forgive him, He gave him a new name, a new mission, and a new identity. Paul didn't ignore his past. In fact, he often referred to it to highlight the grace of God. But he didn't live in his past. He declared, I am what I am by the grace of God. That same grace is available to you. You may have failed in some area, but you are not a failure. You may have lost something or someone, but you are not lost. You may feel like you've strayed too far, but God still knows exactly where you are. And more than that, He knows exactly who you are. You are His. You are chosen. You are sealed with His Spirit, and no failure can undo what God has spoken over your life. Even when we can't forgive ourselves, God stands ready to forgive. He invites us to bring our broken pieces to Him, not so He can remind us of our flaws, but so He can remind us of His faithfulness. He trades ashes for beauty, mourning for joy, shame for honor. But we have to let go of the lie that our failures define us. We have to stop carrying labels that God never gave us. When we understand that our identity is rooted in Christ, not in our history, we begin to walk in freedom. We stop striving to prove ourselves and start resting in who we already are. We stop being afraid of our past and start trusting that God can use it. We live not as people trying to earn value, but as people who already have it. Your worth doesn't come from what you achieve. It comes from the one who created you. Your future isn't canceled by your failure. It's redirected by God's grace. So if you're struggling with a mistake or a season of your life that feels like a failure, lift your head. Let the truth of who you are sink deep into your heart. You are not your failure. You are His beloved, and His love never failed. God works in silence and stillness. That can be one of the hardest truths to hold on to when you're going through a season where nothing seems to be happening. When prayers feel unanswered, doors stay closed, and hope starts to waver, it can feel like God is distant, uninvolved, or even absent. But the truth is, even when you can't see it, God is working. Even when there's no visible movement, no loud miracles, and no clear direction, He is doing more than you realize. His silence does not mean absence, and His stillness does not mean inactivity. In our human nature, we crave action and results. We measure progress by what we can see, touch, or control. So when things go quiet, we get anxious. We start to question if we missed something, if we're doing something wrong, or if God has changed His mind. But some of God's most important work is done in hidden places, in the quiet moments where nothing seems to be changing. That's where faith is refined, where character is built, and where dependence on Him is deepened. Sometimes God's greatest miracles begin with nothing but silence. Think about the story of a seed. When a seed is planted in the soil, there's a period where nothing appears to be happening. It's buried in darkness, surrounded by dirt, unseen and unnoticed. But under the surface, transformation is taking place. Roots are forming, the foundation is being established, and life is beginning. That's what happens in our lives too. In the silent, still seasons, God is preparing something inside of us that we can't yet see. He's laying the groundwork so that when the growth appears, it will be strong and lasting. Take the example of Esther. For much of her story, there are no overt signs of God's involvement. His name isn't even mentioned in the book, but his presence is unmistakable. He orchestrated every detail, from her adoption by Mordecai to her becoming queen, to her bold decision to speak up for her people. Behind the scenes, God was working through every conversation, every delay, and every twist in the plot. Just because his voice wasn't loud didn't mean his hand wasn't guiding. That's how God works. He is always moving, always arranging things for a greater purpose, even when we can't perceive it. The same was true for Jesus before his public ministry began. For 30 years, he lived in relative obscurity. No crowds followed him, no miracles were performed, and no sermons were preached. From a worldly standpoint, it might have seemed like a waste of time. But during those years, Jesus was growing in wisdom, in favor with God and man, and in understanding of his purpose. That season of stillness was not a pause, it was preparation. When you're in a season where you feel like nothing is happening, don't assume God has forgotten you. He may be doing his deepest work within you. He may be stripping away distractions, teaching you to trust him without guarantees, or positioning you for something far greater than you've asked for. What looks like a delay is often divine timing. What feels like a detour might be God's protection, and what seems like silence might be the sacred space where he's inviting you to listen more closely. There's a different kind of strength that's built in stillness. It's the strength to wait when everything in you wants to rush ahead. It's the strength to believe without evidence, to pray without answers, and to worship without feelings. That's the kind of faith that pleases God, not a faith based on signs, but a faith rooted in trust. And that kind of faith is often forged in silence. Don't underestimate what God is doing just because you can't see it yet. He is the master of hidden work. He formed you in your mother's womb in silence. He calmed the storm with a word after a long night of fear. He raised Jesus from the dead while the world was still grieving. His timing is perfect. His plan is wise, and his methods are far beyond our understanding. So if you're in a season where all you hear is silence and all you feel is stillness, take heart. This isn't the end. This is a holy moment. God is preparing, refining, and aligning things not only for your good, but for his glory. You may not see it today, but one day you will look back and realize that God was doing more in the silence than you ever imagined. Trust him in the quiet. He is working always. Favor often follows faithfulness through hardship. That's a truth we don't always want to hear, especially when we're walking through difficulty. We hope that God's favor will arrive quickly, that breakthrough will come without struggle, that blessings will drop into our laps without the painful process of endurance. But the reality is that God often releases his favor after a season of testing. It's in the fire of hardship that faithfulness is refined, and it's through that faithfulness that favor is born. God is not looking for perfection. He's looking for consistency. He rewards those who stay the course, even when the path is hard, unclear, or lonely. When life feels unfair, when you're doing the right thing but still facing loss or rejection, it's easy to wonder if your faithfulness is even worth it. But God sees every quiet decision to keep going, every prayer spoken in the dark, every tear you cry while still choosing to trust him. He sees the integrity you keep when no one is watching. He sees the obedience that costs you something, and though the results may not be immediate, his favor is building in the background. Think about the life of Job. He was a man known for his righteousness, yet he lost everything: his wealth, his family, his health. Through it all, Job stayed faithful. He wrestled, he questioned, he mourned, but he never cursed God. And after that long, agonizing season of suffering, God restored Job's fortunes twice as much as he had before. Job's favor didn't come in the middle of the trial. It came after he held on, after he trusted even when he couldn't understand. That's the power of faithfulness. It becomes the soil where God plants favor. We see the same in the life of Ruth. She chose to remain with Naomi, even though it meant living in poverty and uncertainty. She could have gone back to her old life, but instead she stayed loyal. She gleaned in the fields, working hard just to survive. It was in those ordinary, faithful actions that God's favor began to unfold. She caught the attention of Boaz, who not only showed her kindness, but later became her husband. Ruth went from being a widow in a foreign land to becoming part of the lineage of Jesus. Her faithfulness opened a door to favor far beyond what she could have imagined. Daniel is another example. He was taken from his homeland, forced into exile, and thrown into situations that tested his values at every turn. Yet he remained faithful, praying regularly, refusing to compromise his faith, even when it meant facing a lion's den. And what followed? God not only rescued him, but promoted him. Favor came after faithfulness in hardship. God honored Daniel's quiet decisions to stay true, even in a hostile environment. Faithfulness is often the bridge between the pain of the present and the promise of the future. It's what carries us through the night while we wait for the morning. And while the world may not reward it right away, God always does. His timing is perfect. He opens doors that no one else can open. He positions people in places of influence when they least expect it. But it rarely comes without a season of proving, a time when you choose to remain even when everything in you wants to give up. In our own lives, we often want shortcuts to favor. We want immediate results, instant recognition, and quick success. But the kingdom of God operates on a different rhythm. God develops us before he promotes us. He refines us before he releases us. And he watches how we handle difficulty before entrusting us with more. If you're walking through a hard season and staying faithful in it, know that you're not being overlooked. If you'll be prepared. Sometimes the favor God gives after hardship isn't even what we expected. It might not look like riches or fame. It might be peace that surpasses understanding. It might be deeper wisdom, stronger character, a healed relationship, or influence in someone else's life that changes their future. Favor is not always loud. It can be quiet, lasting, and deeply personal, but it is always the result of God's hand on a faithful life. So if you feel weary from doing good with little to show for it, take heart. God is not unjust to forget your labor of love. Keep showing up. Keep trusting. Keep walking in humility and surrender. The favor is coming, not because you earned it, but because God honors those who remain faithful through the storm. He sees, he remembers, and when the time is right, he will open doors no man can shut. Your testimony becomes someone else's hope. That's one of the most beautiful outcomes of God flipping failure into favor. When he restores what's been broken, when he brings you through a dark valley into light, the story you carry becomes more than just your own. It becomes a source of strength for someone who's still in their valley, still in their waiting, still in their pain. The journey you walk through, as hard as it may have been, is now a living testimony that God is faithful and that he can redeem even the worst chapters of a person's life. Often we think our failures disqualify us from being used by God, but it's actually the opposite. Those broken places, when surrendered to him, are transformed into powerful tools of ministry. People connect with pain more than perfection. They're not inspired by flawless lives. They're inspired by real ones, by stories of people who messed up, cried out, held on, and saw God show up. When you share your testimony, you're not just telling others what happened. You're telling them who God is, what he can do, and why they shouldn't give up. There is someone right now struggling with the very thing God delivered you from. Maybe it was addiction, loss, failure, shame, or fear. Maybe you hit rock bottom and thought you would never get up again, but God reached down and lifted you out. And now someone else needs to hear that. They need to know they're not alone. They need to see that survival is possible, that healing is real, and that God hasn't forgotten them. Your testimony bridges that gap. It becomes a lifeline. Think about the woman at the well. She was a social outcast, carrying the weight of shame and rejection, but after her encounter with Jesus, she ran back to her town and told everyone about the man who knew her past and loved her anyway. Because of her testimony, many believed. She didn't need a platform, a title, or a perfect past. She just needed to speak. Her transformation became the spark that lit faith in others. That's the power of testimony. We also see this with the man who was delivered from a legion of demons. After his healing, he wanted to follow Jesus physically, but Jesus told him to go back home and tell others what had happened. He became a living witness in his own region. The very place where he had been mocked, feared, and avoided became the place where his story brought glory to God. His past didn't disqualify him. It amplified the mercy and power of Christ. Your story holds that same power. You don't need to wait until everything in your life is perfect to share what God has done. Testimonies are not just about the ending, they're about the process, about how God met you when you were broken, about how he walked with you through the questions, the doubts, and the silence, about how he didn't give up on you even when you gave up on yourself. When you begin to tell your story, something shifts. It reminds you that your pain wasn't wasted. It gives your suffering meaning. It becomes a tool of healing, not just for others, but for you too. There's something deeply redemptive about knowing your past struggles can bring someone else closer to hope. It turns your scars into signs of victory rather than shame. God never wastes a wound. Every part of your story, every failure, every tear,